All right, welcome everybody. This is the Kubernetes SIG Architecture Production Readiness Sub-Project meeting for January 29th, 2020. Thank you all for attending. I'll just get started with some administrative stuff. So these meetings, they've had really poor attendance the last couple of meetings. Today looks a little better. Partly that was the holidays, but I also think, and a few people being out of town, but I also think the weekly meetings were too frequent. So I'm moving these to bi-weekly. So the next meeting will be in 2 weeks instead of next week. The weekly cadence was really just to get us started. I had a few things on the agenda today. For one, please go ahead and add yourself to the attendees if you haven't already. Well, I guess only I have, so nobody else has. One of the things we talked about in one of the past meetings was trying to get this survey out to everybody by the end of the month. We can take a look at the survey here if you want and have any discussion, but I think what we're going to need is, I was hoping Valerie could make it, but it looks like she's not going to make it today, or maybe she'll be late. We need somebody to convert that into a Google form, which do if nobody else available, but would prefer to delegate that if possible. So let's plan to review that today. The other things I had on the agenda, we had talked about doing reviewing of different caps. One of the caps that I reviewed, or I asked them to do a PRR on, was the sidecar cap. And so he did that. And a few questions came up that I thought I would want to ask the group here. Now we have enough people. There's a couple questions. One is on dependencies. And when I was originally, or when we originally put that together, the way I was thinking about dependencies was sort of dependencies on other services, like the metric service, or even potentially external ones. But the way that Joseph, who answered the question, was really think about internal components, which, I don't know, actually makes sense to me too. And it's just whether we want that as part of, I mean, should be thought through no matter what, like API server, what happens when an API server goes down? Do we want to clarify that question and make sure that it covers all of those things? Do people, where do other people stand on that?
My personal feeling is that we should, like, pretty much everything would be depending on API server and
exactly.
Stuff like that. So I would try to make that a little bit more explicit, that we ask for things that may, like, mostly what was referring initially. So like external things that may not be obvious, things that may not be running in every single cluster, like potentially not everyone is running metric server or components like that.
That was my original thing, but I do think it's useful for people to think through, and I don't know that everybody has, what happens if they lose API server, right? Their controller can't talk to it, or kubelet can't talk to it. Like, maybe that should even be just a separate question in the failure mode. Like, just a note when we say document the failure modes, one of the things could be, what happens if API server is unavailable? Or, as just an example to get people thinking, like we did with other things.
Yeah, but maybe. Yeah. but I think that if so, I would split it into 2 questions to make it more explicit.
Okay.
Or sub questions or something like that.
Okay. I can get on board with that. Any other comments from anybody else?
Is external services that the cluster depends on in scope for this? Like, DNS, storage provider, if they're using persistent volumes. Obviously load balancer is a big one. If that goes down, you're basically not getting any traffic. These are things that we ask to operators in the CRE team at VMware, but I'm just wondering if it's in scope for this.
Well, Yeah, I mean, we're asking about features you're adding to Kubernetes. We're not asking about services you're running on Kubernetes, but there may be some overlap in like if you're adding, if you're adding a storage driver, although that's not maybe core anyway, but just trying to come up with something. Then what happens if the storage vendor service isn't available, or the control plane for the storage service isn't available? I mean, the answer may just be you can't provision new volumes, but is it you can't provision new volumes, or is it all volumes are unavailable, or is it I don't know. It seems like useful information as an operator of Kubernetes. When my customers call me up and say, "Hey, nothing's working," I have somewhere to look, and so it seems like reasonable documentation in that sense. But if your load balancer fails, you're not going to get ingress. Well, I don't know. I guess it depends on the feature that's being added. More likely, it's going to be around control plane type of failures. Okay, I'm just going to take a note here. Maybe what we should do is give more examples.
Yeah, I had expected this to be more around when something fails in, let's say a cloud provider call fails in the kube controller manager. We're still making some calls today. We want to make sure that when that fails, it doesn't stop my daemon sets from getting new pods. Right? That's what I'm worried about. Failure means I crash loop. Oh, are you contained enough that you should crash loop?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So I think what I'm hearing is that we want this to be targeted external or optional cluster components. May want a separate note in the failure modes asking what happens if API server or other internal components.
And I think that like providing some 1 or 2 examples, like in the questions, would be very useful. I mean, like over time, I evolved slightly the scalability part, and like the newer version has some examples comparing to, or more examples comparing to the initial one, and the answers are much closer to what I'm expecting now. So what I was originally expecting. So I think apparently that helps.
Okay. I mean, just questions for CSI, for example, could be around storage vendors. Okay. Anybody can add to this notes if they want to. Cool. All right. Then the other one was test for enablement and disablement. So we asked this question of like, are there tests for this? But what does that even mean? It's not necessarily an easy question. Do we think just unit tests, like imagine a typical feature that adds a field to some resource. Then you need, when you disable the feature, for the resources that were created while it was enabled, not to choke things, right? Or and I know a lot of our API infrastructure kind of handles some of this for us, but what do we consider sufficient tests for enablement and disablement? Are unit tests sufficient around that? And what other examples of enable and disablement tests can we provide? Or do we think this is a reasonable question?
Haven't most of our failure modes been caused not by the inability of a single component to deal with the change from enable to disable to enable, but in the behavior of multiple components. So for instance, I have the API server and controller manager. I enable a feature, that field gets filled in, the API now has it, and then I turn off the feature, and my Cube controller manager tries to take more action on this resource that had some kind of data in it, and now suddenly the API server doesn't like the data being presented back.
So I guess the question is, where are those unit tests, right? I mean, you have unit tests associated with the API server changes for the particular feature, and you have unit tests associated with the controller for the feature. We would need unit tests to make sure they can both handle the data. Or are you saying that somehow they disable the feature only in the API server and not in the controller? Like, if they disable it in both places, wouldn't unit tests in each of those places be sufficient? How else would we test it? Or alternatively, what's a good test? Like, I think that could be a challenging test to write in our existing EDE framework of like turning off. I don't even.
EDE doesn't support the idea of changing the configuration inside of a running cluster.
Exactly. So that's where we kind of stumble and say, yeah, that would be the ideal test, but we don't support that kind of functionality right now in our framework. So so we're asking people if they have a test that there's no way for them to write. So this is either a gap that we've identified that really we should have a way in our EDE framework to write these, and in which case that's actually a nice outcome for this program, or we think it's sufficient to do unit tests, and we just need to make sure that they're there.
And certainly unit tests are better than nothing.
Yes.
I mean, you could write an integration test that's kind of like this, but it's not necessarily sufficient. It's probably better than a unit test because you could run the control loops and turn things on and off. But the E2E kind of proves that all the wiring works instead of like some partial subset.
Do we have a framework? I guess I don't know all the testing pieces well enough. I thought EDE was the only way we had to do integration. Or there
no, there's a separate set of integration wiring. The difficulty is that it doesn't bear maybe as much resemblance to an actual launch as we would like, and it still lacks some things like a cloud provider integration, for instance.
Yeah, it's another way to say what David said. It lacks all of the wiring, and at a test like this, you're testing the wiring, like the individual pieces work.
Well, so I'm not sure they do. So I guess an outcome that says you should write a unit test that actually makes sure these little pieces work. That's probably a good outcome from this.
No, I'm not saying don't write the unit tests. I'm saying that don't gain a infinite sense of confidence from those unit tests.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is unit tests are helpful, but not necessarily sufficient. Integration tests may be helpful, but are incomplete. E2E framework doesn't support these types of tests. Now, from oh, sorry, there's something in chat here. Oh, okay. So from what actions can we take perspective, I think the first action is, and I can take this, it's fine. clarify in PRR questions that unit tests are what we're looking for now. And then I guess we need to see, unless we think integration tests are what we're looking for, which we can discuss in 1 second. And then lastly, EDE framework. So do we think it's worth the effort to make the EDE framework support this kind of test? Or should we maybe raise an issue and bring it to SIG testing and see how painful they think it will be? Yeah. Very.
I think given the failures I've seen, I guess most of them would be handled by unit tests if they were actually unit tested on both sides.
Okay. So that sounds reasonable to me. If we ensure unit tests all expected. That sounds reasonable to me. Anybody else have thoughts? In which case, we would just take the one action item. Okay, awesome. All right, anybody else have anything? We had, or I know Wojciech, like you said, you clarified some things already in the questionnaire. I'll clarify the questionnaire with this, and I can take this one too.
I also looked into this this sidecar containers cap like that you were pushing, and like their answers look pretty reasonable to me.
Okay, good. Okay, good question. Why doesn't Google Docs pick this up as an AI now for me? Maybe if I enter, I don't know. Or maybe it's hidden behind a Zoom thing. Yes, it is. Okay. Okay. Moving along then, I guess before we jump over to that PR thing, I don't know, David, since you're here, have you had any chance to look at postmortem stuff, or do you still see value in it? Right, we talked about it. Like you did this from memory, right? So in theory, that's the kind of thing.
I think I really want to see the survey results, right? So we started putting together questions in the survey. I think you and I both put a lot of edits in there. And I'm really interested in seeing whether customers are actually, by and large, experiencing the kinds of failures that we're trying to prevent.
Okay. Okay. All right. Sorry, I'm going to do these out of order because I think this one's going to potentially take the longest, so I just want to move it to the end. Oh my goodness. Did anybody look at these measures? I have to admit I did not. It doesn't look like anybody did. All right, I don't know that we should bother reviewing the, well, maybe we can take a quick look at them. We have a little time. So Vish put together these ideas for potentially how we could measure the effectiveness. Um, time to mitigation for GA features measured as the human time involved in a given issue, surveyed for each release across a select group of experienced case users. That sounds difficult to gather. Number of bugs discovered in features, post-GA measured via GitHub. Difficult in maybe an aggregate. That to me seems quite challenging because you need to normalize those over sort of the size and scope of the features, which is almost impossible to do. Mean time to resolution measure between an issue against a GA feature is filed or to when it gets resolved.
I think that one's fairly easy to capture, but it's a little bit of correlation versus causation in my mind.
Yeah, well, it's hard to measure any. Yeah.
It depends. Well, it depends on how many we have.
Yeah, I feel like it's tough to, point to the MTTR for bugs and point to an increase or decrease as a result of, this questionnaire.
Thing. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm thinking about that. I mean, on the Cube project as a whole, it might be a little difficult given the number of issues that we have, especially if ones get open and linger. But I mean, most of us ship products, and we measure how many bugs we have on those, right?
Mm-hmm.
That one seems practical to me.
It's definitely the most practical of the three, in my opinion.
Yeah, let me try and understand human time involved in a given issue. The first one, I'm trying to understand. Kind of mitigation for GA features measured as the human time involved. I don't even know what that means. Alerted a human timestamp.
I imagine for those of us with hosted Kubernetes, we get complaints or we can detect failures, and then how long it takes to get to the point where it's no longer an active problem.
I guess so.
But that is hard to measure, I think.
Yeah, I don't think people track their time very well. Maybe, at least in my experience, around like if they're working on 10 different, well, mitigation for, are they a given issue? So is like there's on-call issues, which is a whole nother thing than some bug opened by somebody. Like it's not entirely clear if he's talking about like escalations or on-call operational things, maybe is what he's saying. It requires people involved in it to, yeah. I mean, just the operation of the program to gather this data does not seem worth the value of the data, in my mind. Like you're talking, we're going to have to take the people we get survey results from, they're going to have to implement some way to measure this within their organization, and then we're going to have to aggregate that. And that just doesn't seem likely to succeed. Okay. All right. So yeah, I guess of the three, I have to say, yeah, the last one, because we can measure that pretty easily. Whether it's the thing I guess I would want to do is, in order to make it more meaningful, would be there would need to be a cleaning process for these issues, because there's a lot of issues that wouldn't be things we expect to catch. I mean, you know, that aren't really production readiness related, but maybe like, you know, this feature doesn't work the way I expect, which is a design issue, or I don't know that production readiness doesn't mean there's no bugs, right? It's really about these cascading failures. It's about the ability to mitigate and react to failures during operation. So how do we clean these so that the ones that actually we expect to affect?
So we take a very operator-centric approach in the CRE team, meaning we're asking people like, do you have proper alerting in place? What is your incident response plans? You know, how do you qualify a given technology to be promoted into GA or production? And really in our mind, like, you know, a lot of the production readiness, like almost isn't like one-to-one related to a technology. It's almost related to like, you know, do you have systems and maybe even humans in place to be able to respond when things go wrong?
Right. And so this is when you're talking about bugs, that's not really production readiness, right? I mean, it's response time for your on-call, and that and mitigation time for your on-call, and that is the first one that's like within an organization. And I don't have the bandwidth to chase down 30 different organizations to give me this data and get the legal and privacy agreements put together to allow these organizations to do that. I just don't see that as reasonable, that first one, of reasonably being able to get that data, or without such an effort that it's questionable whether it's worth it to measure the effectiveness of this. And okay, so the last one,
I think we could actually do it if we wanted to devote the effort. We have the list of patches. They are in the hundreds, but we have the list.
You're talking about the third one?
Yeah. Oh, am I on the wrong one?
No. Yeah, I jumped back to the first one for a minute, and then I jumped back to the third one. Sorry, because Jed was saying like, well, how does bug resolution time really?
I think it speaks more to code quality.
Yeah.
Than it does to production readiness.
Yes.
I also want to see code quality go up.
Me too. Absolutely.
But it does seem more related to code quality.
Unless we can identify specific features that sort of come out of a production readiness failure. So like we could just generally say, let's start putting together metrics around this and you know, going and evaluating this. And then that can give us an overall measure of whether code quality is improving. But
so
if we select a subset of them, that may indicate production readiness improvement.
What if instead we focused on the survey, right? So we have questions in the survey that talk about things like, have you ever had to disable a beta feature? Have you ever chosen to enable a beta feature? Do you allow beta features in production? As questions. And other things like, have you ever had to try to disable a GA feature? Now, admittedly, very few people can, but have you ever tried to disable a GA feature? Have you used certain tools to assess outages? And if we did that, if we got good responses, and we did that multiple times, we would get a sense of how we were doing. Also, if we just have a question, which release do you run? We would have a sense of whether the releases were generally getting better or worse.
Right, and whether the upgrade process, which production, the whole part of the point of the production readiness is to, you know, and the feature gating is to make upgrades a little bit easier, right? You can turn off features until you're ready. Well, not with GA ones, but yeah, okay. You know what? I think that I think is a better idea. I think that we could potentially do. God, I hate the way Zoom blocks my tabs. We could potentially do this last one, but it's not something we need to actually take action to measure. I mean, we can. It's all in the history, so we can go back and measure it for the past two, which is also good. But I would say right now, David, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. If we focus on making sure that the questions here also capture the data, the metrics we want. And my comments here, I was really thinking about, okay, yeah, okay, so and go into effectiveness measures. They won't change the process. So I was sort of looking at this questionnaire more around the process, but you're right, we should, I don't want to give two surveys, so we should just include it in the same one, but we should add questions to it that are easy to answer, and some of them already are there that that are useful for those measures, these effectiveness measures. So, all right. That might mean something like we want to ask not just have you ever, but something to the effect of, you know, I am able to, you know, when there's a problem, I'm able to see it in metrics, right? Or I find out about my problems because my users complain, versus I find out about my problems because my metrics look funny.
Do you want to go down through this and just do a quick dividing into sections of questions we think we want to keep, questions we think we want to not ask now, and
Sure.
try to get that list, because I do see this as informing a lot of what we do. So I would change the question, how many releases old is your current version of Kubernetes? I would rather phrase that as check the versions of Kubernetes that you have installed.
Okay.
And give just the majors, right?
Yeah. I think I probably have edit on. Oh, I don't know.
You do. You have edit. You just aren't on it.
No, I don't. Actually.
You don't? Do I have edit?
No, I think it's Jorge who did it.
Yeah, I don't have edit either. Oh.
Yeah. So, check the.
This odd stuff is hard. You should turn it off, David.
Activated versions of. Okay, oops. Using. All right. Did we want to separate this out?
Yeah, I would probably. That is hard. Really hard. Can we make a copy that we can edit?
Yeah. All right. I, I don't want to like, well, we have 20 minutes. Like, is this the best way to use our time, is to go through this together, or should we do this offline?
We haven't reached resolution in the past 3 weeks, and I would really like to reach resolution. Now, I don't care whether anyone else wants to stay, I suppose.
Yeah.
What did you want to discuss instead?
Nothing. We got
Okay.
20 minutes. Let's just do it.
I have you nailed to the wall. I want to go through this.
No, works for me. I want to get it done too. Okay, what reasons do you have?
I think we get maybe 1 or 2 big open-ended questions. That one might be it. That's a good question.
All right. Change this to. Okay, first of all, let's accept all these for now, at least.
Yeah.
Do this as an edit. Sorry, I'm picky. All right.
Yeah. Instead of do you use a hosted Kubernetes, how about we ask, check the kinds of Kubernetes that you use, and we list EKS, GKE, IKS. We just list all the major ones, and
we can put an other box. They can enter something.
Sure.
Okay.
While you're typing that out, I was going to ask, you guys have the question for major version and minor version. Isn't technically the only versions we have are minor and patches based on Sembar? Or are we saying 1.6 to 1.7 major?
Yeah.
Yeah, technically, yes.
Okay, so we'll make Mo comment on this doc afterward.
There we go.
We can niggle over vocabulary, sure, and I can see value in that doing it. But
what don't you guys, David? You guys have like there's like an OpenShift online and there's an OpenShift.
Yeah, I don't need to have it at that level of granularity.
Okay. Well,
I might throw IKS in the list too, the IBM one.
Okay. I mean, there's
a lot, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's like 100, literally. But we can't list them all. Okay.
Okay. How do you stay up to date with patch fixes? I don't think I care about the answer to that question for this survey.
Yeah, I agree. This is not versions. I'm just going to leave that.
Yeah. So what is your decision-making process? I don't think we'll get a good answer to that question.
I don't think so either. People won't.
Okay. And the same for using beta features. How about we skip to the easier ones? I think we agree that we want to know if they've ever enabled an alpha feature or disabled a beta feature.
Yeah. Do we care about the version? Probably not at this level.
Not right now, I don't think.
Yeah. Agreed. Oops.
Yikes.
What did I do? What the heck did I do? All right.
I like your
do you think Y is good?
I do think Y is good. Okay. Especially because if they have done it, they might be angry enough to actually answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we need Y in the enabled. All right. And then this is where I was like, you're saying there are some GA features you can disable? Like,
There are some. The API servers had some. Usually those are ones that didn't work out very well. But I guess I would be looking at, like, when people think about enabling features, they probably think about things like, I enabled a flag, I turned on RBAC. RBAC is GA. Oh my God, RBAC is horrible, I turned it off. Who invented this?
Okay.
And so I think it's valid, right? Like, because there's also
when you say disabled, you mean more like not using an optional feature.
Well, I tried to use it and it was so bad I turned it back off.
Right.
And I think people consider that disabled, right?
Right. I'm just gonna put that in for now. We can wordsmith a little bit later.
Yeah. Average time to adoption. I don't know that we're going to get something. I think it tells us more about the orgs than it does about stability.
And nobody's going to know, frankly, anyway. I mean, the average, they might be able to pick anecdotes out, but
yeah,
they're not going to have that information in their heads.
I think you need to check that one. Whatever.
Okay. Not sure I want to ask this one. I'm not sure we're going to get good answers to that. But.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Okay.
I think the answer to how do people put their stuff in production is an answer to a different question or to like a different area. More interested in things like the what was it they added to Cube Control? I can't remember the name of it now. It caused a big blow up. But I think that's more related to something different than to whether features are ready for production.
Okay. Yeah, I agree that doesn't seem totally relevant. I don't see how that's relevant to this either.
Yeah, I don't think so. So I tried to write questions here that were more about very concrete about when are you allowed to start using a feature, because a lot of places do have rules about you may not have beta in production.
Yes, absolutely.
And they do have rules about like, well, we aren't going to adopt that till it gets the first service pack or something crazy like that.
Right. Okay.
And so I tried to focus those around, refocus the questions.
Are developers allowed to rely on, are they allowed to rely on any beta features in production? What criteria used when adopting features? How do they define it?
I don't know that I asked that question.
Somebody asked it. Valerie. I think Valerie asked
it.
Okay. But we have to, that's too open-ended. Like,
I think it's too open-ended too. Maybe we move to the open-ended section and then think about whether we can rephrase.
Okay. Allowed to rely on GA, allowed to rely on beta features in production. We can ask if they're allowed to rely on alpha features in production, but God, I hope not.
Those people are going to die out.
Those people don't deserve to have input. In the last blank, have you used Kubernetes? Prometheus?
So this was one I wasn't sure how we could structure the survey. So are we allowed to? I see a question like using Prometheus to debug a problem with a Cube feature as a question kind of for a developer. I don't know if I repeated it for operations. So when you write a survey, are you allowed to say like, are you a developer? Or are you an operator?
Sure, we can ask that. I mean,
and then can we ask them different questions? Maybe we can find a way to ask them the same question.
I don't know. I can look into that.
Okay.
I guess I can put a comment on the document. Can we conditionally ask questions based?
I guess maybe if we're careful about it, we won't have to. But
yeah, but it's good to know. I mean,
yeah.
Okay, I see. Yeah, our developers allowed, and then all right. So with a cube feature. So when you're saying this, you mean in their development cluster, or you mean when they're on call?
Yeah, so I know that there are differences in like expectation and access, right? Not all developers are allowed to view Prometheus metrics for their cluster in production, right? And so yeah, I was thinking of it in terms of I'm a developer, I want to try to use this stateful set, and it's not working.
Right. How do I figure out why?
How do I figure that out? And then in the other case, I was thinking about it from an operations perspective. This stateful set is destroying my cluster. How do I figure out that it was the stateful set, and then find the right one?
So I guess the developer ones are really geared more like during the development cycle. Then it would sound like. I mean,
but if we leave it vague.
Yeah.
Can we just ask the same question both times and get a good answer?
Yeah, we just ask who they are, and we just ask the question anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And the operators can answer these questions too, right? This is about their policies. This isn't about.
Yeah, I think so.
So we should have a question like. Are you an operator or a dev? You know,
I think it's usually described as what best describes your role.
Yeah. DevOps. What does that even mean? But okay. And anybody else really probably shouldn't be answering this question.
Yeah, it's true.
I don't care what the executives think.
Yeah. So obviously, I like all 5 of my questions.
Yes, you do. I think they're good too. I like them too. Yeah, I'm going to guess like for devs, this is going to be the most common thing, right? Like,
I don't know.
I don't know. I'm guessing, right? I'm speculating, right? I mean, everybody uses this all the time. I mean, through kube control, right? When you do a describe, you see the event. So, like, these two are, well, Kubernetes logs, not as much.
It depends on what kind of developer you are.
Yeah. But maybe we should, do we want to talk about like?
No, I don't need to separate out the developer. That I think that the number of developers who work on Core Cube are so small that they won't meaningfully change the result.
And they're not likely to go, oh, I'm going to go look at it. Anybody else isn't likely to go look at the kubelet log. All right. So these are all not open-ended. Which is good. Oops. What tools do you use to monitor your cluster?
I liked that question. I think having checkboxes here would be pretty good.
Yeah. What is this for? Do you use operators? Why do we?
So in the sense of like the operator framework stuff and the etcd operator, like the sense of someone wrote a controller to manage your software. Do you use those? I don't. I mean, I didn't write that question.
Oh, okay.
Mine are all in the next section. You can eliminate them because you have their duplicates already above.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I
don't know that I mean, it's interesting, but I don't know that it affects readiness.
I mean, you could argue, you could argue that you need operators to operate software that's not particularly production ready, but.
And yet we have an entire company who has bet on operators to run Kubernetes, and it should tell you something.
Yes. Yes. So I mean,
I don't
think this is relevant.
Answer this.
What's that?
I don't think I need the answer to that question.
I don't either. I don't think it's relevant. Okay. What are the most troublesome aspects of Kubernetes? That's just like, how do we answer that?
I don't think I want to ask that.
Well, Pablo, yeah, I mean, I think we have a specific meaning of production readiness in mind. So I don't think we want to ask that.
Yeah, I guess one of my goals out of this is that if we get production readiness right, then we will end up in a spot where people say, yes, all developers are able to depend on all GA features in production.
Yes.
That maybe I allow them to depend on beta features, that I do not have to actively disable beta features in environments other than production, because in production, maybe you just don't want them on all, and that I have not had to downgrade my clusters. And if we can get or we can get good answers to all those, the correct answer to all of those,
right,
then I think we've succeeded. That's what I'm looking for out of this. I don't know for sure what you are.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, it's to build that confidence and to ensure that, yeah, people don't have that in general, people don't have to turn off the features, but if they do, they can detect it very quickly and they can mitigate it very quickly, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
How do you manage Kubernetes clusters?
That doesn't also seem.
I think I'm going to say that actually overlaps with which kinds of Kubernetes do you use. So we already asked a question.
Right. Okay.
It kind of does that.
Okay, so then let's look at this with an eye. We have 4 minutes left. Let's go back to this and look at it with an eye of are we getting all of our measurement? Like, is there enough to measure in here? So like age of the versions they're using, that's going to be a measurement. The answers to, have you ever needed to do this? This helps inform our survey questions to some extent. So this helps with measurement. Okay. Have you ever disabled, turn off? Okay. That's a qualifier. This is also, I would say, measuring effectiveness.
Yeah.
This is helping to understand where we should target. The way I read this is this helps us understand whether the tools we're providing for resolving live issues are useful.
It's also related to the questions that we had on the production readiness review for KEPS that talk about things like, I want to make sure you have Prometheus metrics. Right. I suspect we'll see people use Prometheus metric a lot, but if they come back and say, I never use Prometheus metric and I debug everything in the Kubernetes log, well, I mean, that's probably where we should focus effort.
Right.
I think it's unlikely, but that's why I broke out those 3.
I wonder if it though matters, if your scale matters. Maybe we need a question. Like if I'm some small organization that just has a couple of clusters, I may not be monitoring things in all the same way that if I've got, 100 clusters or large clusters or whatever, right?
Okay. I can see adding a question about that. How many clusters do you interact with? How many clusters do you manage?
How many clusters and how many total number of nodes in those clusters? So you think people?
Yeah, let's put it down here, and then we can have the call tomorrow of which questions are the most important ones to answer. Right now, we don't have numbers on them, and I don't know how many we've asked so far.
Okay. All right. Okay. I just want to be able to strip out, like, I manage 2 clusters with 3 nodes each, because I mean, I guess those people are, there may be there's more of them, and so maybe it's important. But
I was going to say, I would not rule them out of hand.
Right. But they may have very different ways of managing those clusters than, I manage
Yes.
50 clusters with
So
1,000.
when you have a few enough clusters to manage them as pets, you may have a different workflow.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, cool. So I think that looks pretty good from that measurement. Okay, open-ended. Which open-ended ones do we think? Oh shit, we're out of time. I can take another minute if you can.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, what reasons do we have to not adopt the latest version more quickly? Oh, I'm getting kicked out of my room now.
Oh, all right. We'll hash that out online then.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.